Good morning. Hold fast to dreams. If dreams die, life is a broken winged bird that cannot fly. Hold fast to dreams, for when dreams go, life is a barren field frozen with snow, by Langston Hughes. As we celebrate our theme, the legacy of civil rights in America, we pause to pay tribute to the many known and unknown heroes who passed the torch to the next generation. Today in this audience are some of those local trailblazers who made it possible for us to enjoy the freedoms that we have. Let's give our honored guests a hand, please. At this time, I'd like to introduce our Mistress of Ceremony, Ms. Robin A. Phillips. Robin A. is an outstanding academic scholar here at Cobb. She is involved in many clubs at Cobb, Black History Club, Beta Club, in the community, National Achievers, and many more community organizations she volunteers. Today I want to thank her family for allowing her to be a part of this great tradition at Cobb Middle School. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you our Mistress of Ceremony, Ms. Robin A. Phillips.
Good morning. We are so excited that so many of our distinguished guests joined us today. This is our 5th annual Geneva Wesley Black History Assembly. Almost 40 years ago, Mrs. Wesley embarked on a journey to start these assemblies to share African American history to Cobb students and the community at large. Thanks, Mrs. Wesley, for your dedication and service. Today, Cobb continues to educate its students and the community about the significance of African American history as an integral part of American history. Our theme is the legacy of civil rights in America. It is fitting because we honor the many known and unknown foot soldiers who sacrificed so that we can enjoy today's freedoms. Many of the local foot soldiers are here with us today. Let's give them a round of applause. We will now have the Pledge of Allegiance by Madison King.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Madison. We will now have the welcoming occasion by Jasmine Littles.
Good morning. On behalf of our principal, Ms. Fitzgerald, assistant principals, Mr. Robertson, Mr. Holmes, and Dean of Students, Mr. Witherington, faculty, staff, and students, welcome to our 5th annual Geneva Wesley Black History Assembly. As we celebrate our theme, the legacy of civil rights in America. America has made tremendous progress since the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1st, 1863. The free slaves at that moment believed a better day would come for themselves and generations to follow. Our country continues to embrace the ideas of the Constitution. So today, as we reflect on this legacy, let's remember our many local heroes, known and unknown. Many of these local foot soldiers are in attendance today as our special guests. Let's give them a round of applause. Thanks for being a part of this inspiring celebration, and we want you to know that you will always be a part of the Cobb family.
At this time, we will now have an African American American play by Mrs. Mice, our theater director.
For 6 generations, my family has been enslaved. My grandmother tells me that we first came to this land when my ancestors were seized by ignorance. Our tribe would raid other tribes in the dark of night for captives as tribute to the strange pale men who came in large ships with empty bellies. We would fill the bellies with our enemies and did not ask where they were going, just glad that they were gone. But one day, there were no enemies left. So the bellies of the ship were filled with my ancestors. For the appetite of greed follows no laws and maintains no alliances. For 100 years, we have struggled, starved, frozen, broken, and risen. And we have maintained the hope that one day we could be free to return to the land from whence we came. And today, we can. Today, we are free to return to the land of our ancient people. But how can I leave? I know every root, every stone, and every insect that crawls under my feet. The earth that I work is more familiar to me than the soil from which my roots were torn. I cannot go. My prison is not my home, but freedom is my destiny.
Equality for all. We the people, we the people, we the people has laid the foundation for the greatness of this country. We have worked the land, carried the burdens, and spilled our blood so that the freedom of this so that the freedom of so that the freedoms of America could be shared equally, and yet it is not. What is freedom if I cannot drink from the same fountain of knowledge as others? If I am second class to my peers and equals? This is not true freedom without equality. Rosa Parks knows this, Dr. King knows this, even President Johnson knows this. This is why I march. It's why I press. I cannot bear to see the sacrifice of our forefathers lost to fear and inactivity. Equality is my destiny.
Thank you to the theater department, and thank you, Quentin Bruce, for showing us, and thank you, Quentin, for showing us that we can overcome. Next, we will have Jasmine Littles enlighten us a little bit about the Freedom Riders.
Hello. Today I'm going to tell you about the Freedom Riders. One particular one was William E. Harbor. He was one of 8 children. He was born in Piedmont, Alabama. Mr. Harbor, his participation in the Freedom Riders led to his arrest and imprisonment for over 30 days. He is an active alumnus of the university and has a scholarship sponsored by the Atlanta Alumni Association named the William E. Harbor Academic Scholarship. Back here also are the Freedom Riders posters that Coach Allen class have been working on for a couple of weeks. And on the right of me are the artistic point of view of what African Americans, this is how they express their feelings through art. And particularly the one in the middle is the artistic drama and music of what they overcome. Thank you.
My apologies to Jasmine. It is Jasmine Avery, not Jasmine Littles. We will now have Philip Okonkwo introduce our keynote speaker, Mr. Fred Flowers.
Mr. Fred Flowers is a native of Tallahassee and the great-grandson of one of the oldest business families, the Hadley family. Mr. Flowers was the first African-American athlete at FSU or at any major university in the Southeast. He earned a Bachelor of Science degree from FSU in 1969, a master's degree in urban and regional planning in 1973, and his law degree from University of Florida in 1979. Mr. Flowers is a member of Bethel Baptist Church, and just to name a few, member of the Florida Bar, American Bar Association, Tallahassee Urban League, Lincoln Neighborhood Board, Omega Psi Phi Fraternity, and many more organizations. His family legacy, Attorney Flowers established his own law firm in 1981 and has won numerous landmark cases pertaining to public interest. He's proud of his trailblazing work at FSU and integration statute. He's married and is a proud father and grandfather. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a Cobb Cub show of appreciation to Attorney Fred Flowers.
I'm honored to be here with you this morning to participate in this celebration of the legacy of civil rights. My sister Darby Flowers was supposed to be here, but we have a trial in federal court starting this Monday, and so we had scheduled a session to meet with the court staff to go over the technology in the courtroom. So I said, well, Darby, you go ahead and start the session. I need to be over to Cobb to participate in this program, and I'll join you when I can. So that's why Darby is not here. I'll start with, I'm going to say a few words about the legacy of civil rights and history and those type of things, but I also welcome questions from you as I go along, because I find that's very interesting and informative of me. And believe it or not, this morning I Googled the definition of history. You might think you know the definition of history, but I think it was very instructive, because it said that history is the study of a chronology of events of a people, i.e. the study of European history. And I said, my goodness, the textbooks would have you believe that history started with Europeans. And so when I was coming along during the heyday of the civil rights movement, we used to refer to history as his story. And so I think if we had true comprehensive education, we would need a week of Black history. And so history goes back way, way before European history. And if you look at all the great mathematicians, the architects in the universities in Alexandria, Virginia, they preceded European history by hundreds and thousands of years. And so for those of you who are really students of history, be real students of history and go back to the beginnings. And so if I ask you, what is civil rights? Maybe you can answer that question in your mind without raising your hand. But you will probably say that civil rights are those fundamental individual freedoms that we now take for granted. The freedom of association, the right to vote, the right to education. Those are the type of civil rights that we normally think of. So if I were to ask you, when did the struggle for civil rights begin? What would your answer be? Some of you might say that the struggle for civil rights began in the 1950s. Not so. The struggle for civil rights began the day the first Africans were brought to the shores of America in 1619. And so from that point, from this point today, there has been this struggle for freedom, which we have come a long way in reaching those freedoms, but we have a long way to go. And if you look back at the history of slavery, one thing that will put you in jail is that if you were caught teaching a slave how to read and how to write. Think about that for a second. It was a crime to be caught teaching a slave how to read and how to write. Why was that? Because if you can free a person's mind, he could overcome whatever circumstance that he was involved in. And so I have a 20-year-old grandson and a 7-year-old granddaughter. And I asked my daughter, if you talk to Desiree about slavery, would it be too shocking, too difficult, too traumatic on her psychologically for her to receive? And I gave a speech at Ricketts School the other day, and I talked about lynching. And then the little girl in the 4th grade raised her hand. She says, "What is that?" She had never heard of lynching. And so I don't want to go too deep into what that means, but the word lynching, which was a part of slavery, came from a man named James Lynch, who was a slave plantation owner in the Caribbean, who came up and taught the slave masters in the 1800s how to control their slaves. And one of them was by this thing called lynching. In fact, my office used to be on Park Avenue, and there's a giant oak tree in front of my old office that's about 600 years old. And I would guess to say that the Indians played on that tree, and there are also probably many lynchings that occurred there. And so, in trying to give you a perspective on the history of civil rights, I want to kind of draw your attention to Martin Luther King's mountaintop speech. You remember the part of the speech where he said, "I may not get there with you, but I've seen the mountaintop." And so I want to use a mountain as an analogy to explain where we are in this struggle for civil rights. I would say when the first slaves came to America in 1619, Africans in America were at the bottom of the mountain. Then came the Civil War and the Emancipation Proclamation in about 1865, I believe. And I would say then that we were about halfway up the mountain. Halfway up the mountain covered a period of 250 years. And so from the 1865 through the Reconstruction period, up through the 1950s and the Brown v. Board of Education legal case, I would say we moved another 1/4 way up the mountain. And so now that covers a period of about 300 years of American history. So it took 100 years from the Civil War to the 1950s, where you probably have been taught that civil rights began, the bus boycotts, Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King. So that would bring us to about another, we moved just a little bit higher up this mountaintop that Martin Luther King talked about. And so based on the history of change in America and how many hundreds of years that it's taken us to get to this point, I would say, using that analogy, it's going to take another 100 years before we truly reach equality and diversity in America. So I'm going to say something that you're probably going to find somewhat shocking. And what I'm going to say is that although slavery is dead in the normal sense that we know about, that there is a new form of slavery that has engulfed America. So what is this new form of slavery? And some of you may be able to relate to what I'm about to say. This new form of slavery is the mass incarceration of our young black men and our young black women. Martin Luther King never dreamed that our communities would be flooded with drugs. He never dreamed that we would be robbing and killing and stealing from each other. And so he never dreamed of a lot of the horrors that have beset our community. If you incarcerate the man, what effect does that have on the family? It has a tremendous effect. That means our young boys and our young girls are reared without the presence of a man in the house. That means that the family does not have the strict disciplinarian that the man represents. So give some thought to this, to what I'm saying to you about this new form of slavery. That may be too shocking for you to digest. I don't mean to offend anybody. I'm just telling it like it is. And what I would like to say to you is that all of you, go back to where it used to be. My mother, and I'm a part of the Hatley family. And if you study history in Tallahassee, at one time, the Hatley brothers owned grocery stores, they owned gas stores, they sold cars, they were entrepreneurs, meaning that they could put people to work so that they could feed their families. And one reason that I'm a lawyer today is so that I can work for myself. There is a tremendous amount of freedom in being able to work for yourself. First of all, nobody can fire you. Secondly, when it comes down to it, you can say pretty much whatever you want to say within the bounds of decency. And so, I really don't know how much time I have, but if there are some questions that you would like to ask me, I will be happy to answer them. And then I want to talk to you a little bit about the integration statute at Florida State. I left the campus of Florida State in 1969. I came to Florida State in 1965. And when I came to Florida State, there were only 10 of us of the same skin color. And all over America, there was like this army of civil rights students that sort of fanned out across America to integrate segregated universities. And we were chosen by our coaches and our counselors to undertake this task because all of us, I don't know if you're familiar with with W.E.B. Du Bois. Study W.E.B. Du Bois because he talked about something called the talented tenth. Have any of you ever heard of this concept of the talented tenth? And what he was saying is that in any group, among any people, there's going to be a talented tenth. 1 out of 10 will be able to succeed no matter what the circumstances. And so those of us who went to FSU in the early 60s, we were a part of the talented 10th. We were all valedictorians and salutatorians of our high school classes. We knew that no matter what the circumstances and what the teachers thought, they were not going to be able to flunk us out. And so it took a special type of person to endure what we went through during that time. The particulars of the things that happened, I rarely talk about, but we were there for a purpose. And to look around to see the diversity in this group, if you go to FAMU University now and watch the baseball game, you see Hispanics, black, whites, all interacting together. And that's the kind of diversity I think Martin Luther King was talking about. And so when I talk to young people, one thing I ask them, well, what's 0 times 0? Of course, that's 0. What's 0 divided by 0? That's also 0. Then I ask, how many hours per day do you spend listening to the radio and looking at TV? And I get a lot of hands, and they tell me the number of hours. Then I say, how many hours do you spend studying per night? And a lot of them say 0. If you don't put anything in, you won't get anything out. And so just take the time and spend the time to get your lesson. And that was one of the things that we were taught coming up. The most important thing is to get your lesson. And you can't shuck and jive on that. Because when you take those tests, you're going to be competing against people who got their lesson. So if you don't perform well on tests, there's a good reason for that, probably because not enough time was gone into the preparation. So if you glean anything from what I'm saying to you today, turn off the radio, turn off the TV, relish the quiet time, and study, study, study. With that, I pretty much concluded my remarks. I hope what I have said has not been too shocking to you, but as I say, I'm just telling it like it is and keeping it real. And I found that the older I get, the easier it is to say what's on my mind. And I learned that from my mama. I just, I'm gonna be decent about it, but I picked my spots and I've just told you what is on my mind. And so I thank you again for this opportunity to participate in this program.
Come on back up here, will you? Will you join me at the podium? Thank you, sir. We are so pleased to have you with us today, and we thank you. Every adventure begins with a pioneer, and you are that pioneer for us. They are the future, and I really, truly say, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome one day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So thank you all so much.
We will now sing Lift Every Voice and Sing, led by Mr. Roy.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring, ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of our new day begun, let us march on till victory is won. Stony the road we trod, bitter the chastening rod, felt in the days when hope unborn had died. Yet with a steady beat, have not our weary feet the place for which our fathers sighed. We have come over away with the tears have been watered. We have come treading our path through the blood of the slaughtered. Out from the gloomy past till we're gonna stand at last, where the white gleam of our bright star is cast.
Our closing remarks will be given by our principal, Mrs. Fitzgerald. Let's give it up for our Cobb Club principal, Mrs. Fitzgerald.
Good morning, good morning. So February is Black History Month, and this year's theme is Civil Rights in America. 2014 marks the 50th anniversary of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. The staff and body of Cobb Middle School are very fortunate today to have heard from Attorney Flowers. Mr. Flowers had to leave to go back to prepare for a court case, but he's one of those people that works hard every day for not only African American civil liberties, but everyone's. We're also fortunate today to have Miss Maggie Lewis Butler. Ms. Butler is the vice chair this year of our Leon County School Board. Also in our audience are two former Cobb Middle School principals, Mr. Larry Carmichael and Mr. Edwin DeFay. Miss Geneva Wesley, who our program is named for, is always here with us to share this most gracious day. Okay. In closing, I would like to thank Mr. Jones and the Black History Program Committee for putting this on today, and all of the students, teachers that worked so hard to make sure that this was a great program. Let us give everyone a big round of applause.